This video is brought to you by Mack Weldon. Clothing you can wear. That's not the tagline. Logan isn't considered your typical comic book movie. Sure, it's got a guy that's well over 100 years old with unbreakable metal blades that come out of his hands, plus a mind-reading old British man, and people with robot limbs, and a bunch of kids with special and improbable abilities, but still, this is the realest thing you'll ever see in your life! Of course, this being set in the X-Men universe means there's a bunch of Easter eggs, references, and cameos linked to the comics, the other movies, character histories, and a whole lot more. So let's get into that. Plus also, we'll try and make some sense of this universe's complete nonsense timeline, bearing in mind spoilers, and also bearing in mind Loot Crate giveaway at the end. Two things to bear. Kicking things off, let's talk comics. The idea that the adamantium inside Wolverine's body is slowly poisoning him has been touched upon before. The fact that his bones are coated in it means that his healing factor is slowed significantly. In fact, his body is always compensating for its presence, and it was found when it was removed, his healing became almost instantaneous. Like the movie, he's also lost his healing factor a number of times, including recently in the death of Wolverine. But Logan, like the comic, makes use of a healing serum to fix himself and even grow back an eye, like what we saw happen with his clone, X-24. Wolverine also goes into a berserker rage, like he often does in the comics, and occasionally the movies, depending how PG the universe is feeling at that moment in time. He's also seen wearing a black suit and white shirt combo, like in the death of Wolverine, and he has his classic mutton chops shaped out of his beard towards the end of the film. There have been variations on an evil Wolverine before, not a clone called X-24, but there was once something similar in that there was a robot replica designed with the sole purpose of killing Logan, who was called Albert. Wolverine ended up killing Albert, revealing all the cogs and springs that robot duplicates tend to have, and interestingly, he was actually developed by Donald Pierce, who makes an appearance in this movie. Also, the Transigen Project, where mutant suppressants are used to stem the rate of mutant growth, that's also taken from the comics. The additional goal of the Transigen Project, though, was to capture X-23 in order to study her and create more clones using her DNA. As was revealed in the trailers, in the X-Men movie universe there exists X-Men comics, which are different from the actual X-Men comics. They were created on the request of Hugh Jackman by X-Men veteran Joe Quesada, with colours by Dan Panosian, not sure that's how you say his name, who also created all the covers. The numbering of the comics do somewhat parallel the events of Logan. For example, issue 132 contains a fight between Logan and Donald Pierce. We also get things like the Fastball Special, which has appeared in both the comics and movies, as well as the Dark Phoenix, which is also the rumoured storyline of the next X-Men film. These comics also include the classic Wolverine costume, which unfortunately we never saw Hugh Jackman in, but we do know that in this universe, that's how he is represented to the world. We also know this by the Wolverine toy that one of the Kid Mutants has. Logan's number plate also reads WER112, which could relate to issue 112 of the comics. It's about turning the team into kids or something. I don't know, it's a tenuous link at best. Logan is also very loosely based off Mark Millar's Old Man Logan. And by very loosely, I don't mean any variation on those words. I mean it bears little to no resemblance. But there are some minor similarities. Both are road trip stories, both have the X-Men killed in a tragic accident, though in one it was Wolverine and the other it was Professor X, and they're both set in alternate timelines to the main universe. And I will get to that timeline in a bit, but until then, let's get some more bloody eggs laid. I wrote that down. I didn't like it then. I still don't like it, but I left it in. I'm not sure why. So despite being set in its own universe, there are some callbacks to previous films in the series. Logan has a samurai sword, referencing his time in Japan from the Wolverine, because you know he's a bit of a weeaboo. I mean, he is a little bit. Come on. X-23 is spawned out of his DNA that was retrieved in the post-credits sequence of X-Men Apocalypse. His dog tags are seen, which he requested after taking part in the Weapon X program. His love of cigars carries over after he steals a handful of them from a servo. Servo was short for service station, by the way. It's an Australian thing. I mean, you probably got that from the context. Professor X also mentions how that when he was found, he was a cage fighter, which was how he was introduced in the first X-Men. There's also mention of the battle that happened at the Statue of Liberty, also from that film. And we get the return of the mythical and magical, do whatever you need it to do, adamantium bullet. In X-Men Origins Awful, an adamantium bullet or two will scramble his brain, wiping away any and all memories, but this one can apparently kill him? How does that work? Who knows? Neither makes much sense, but if I had to pick one for continuity's sake, I'm gonna go with the second one, seeing as it is It's a better movie in literally every sense. We also get a few returning characters, plus characters lifted straight from the comics, more or less. Caliban, the mutant that can track other mutants, was last seen in X-Men Apocalypse, played by a different actor. His origin in this movie is similar to the comics, insofar as he helps track down rogue mutants for an evil organization, though originally it was the Morlocks. Professor X is back, freezing people with his mind, as always, this time a little more violently, and he's also got a little bit of hair this time around. There's actually an explanation for why this is, and I want to get into that. Okay, so we all know that the prequel/reboot X-Men trilogy's sole purpose was to explain why Professor X lost his hair. That's why it exists. I'm sure of it. 6 or so hours built to this epic moment, where first we got it at a reasonable length, then the next time around they pulled a total fake out and his hair got longer. Amazing twist. And then in the third film, a blue monster went inside his mind and mentally pushed it out of his head like he was one of those hair Play-Doh toys. But now that his mental faculties are failing, his mind is not so busy, so that means his hair has had time to grow back. Just to clarify, that comes from the mouth of director James Mangold himself, so if you take issue with it, I advise you to sort it out with him. Here's his Twitter handle. He won't care. As for the comics, we get the Reavers, led again by Donald Pierce. Also enhanced, but a little bit less so than the comics. For example, no tank treads for legs guy, but both groups do share a distaste for mutants. X-23 appears pretty much as she is in the comics, a clone of Wolverine, 2 claws on each hand and 1 on each foot, and she was created, for the most part, by Xander Rice. There's mention in the film that Wolverine probably killed Xander Rice's father, which he almost certainly did. Dale Rice worked on the original Weapon X program, so he's probably, one of these gimps. And I guess it was his death that most likely instilled in his son this hatred of mutants. So in a way, his actions make sense. Because if an angry, unkillable man with unbreakable metal bones killed my father, then yeah, years later, I would probably make an exact copy of that man, but also make a female clone, only to then be surprised when one turns out to be a psychopath who doesn't obey orders, and the other wanted to murder me. That's what I would do. Wait, no, I wouldn't. That's dumb. Some of the kid mutants have powers that reflect that of other mutants that we've seen. There appears to be one with Iceman's skill set, Pyro, but more likely Sunspot because Pyro can't create fire, he can only manipulate it. The one with electrical powers we know is based off Christopher Bradley because that's seen in his file. He was originally played by Frodo in X-Men Origins Unbearable. I'm just joking. I know he played Pippin. I'm a big fan of those films and books. The one called Joey could possibly be Joey Bailey, and Richter, the leader, with his seismic abilities, is a character ripped straight from the comics. There's a few others with vague telekinesis abilities, so possibly a Jean Grey thing, and one of them has the ability to strangle a man with grass, so that could be Dryad, but none of that's really crystal clear. Okay, let's get into a few locations. We visit Greenwood Cemetery, and there's a couple of names on a few tombstones that might relate to some Marvel characters, but nothing concrete. That's a place though we have seen in some previous Marvel comics. The kids are also making a break for Canada, which is Logan's place of origin, and Professor X is put up in this almost anti-Cerebro. It even mirrors the way the original looks, but acts as a method of suppressing his telekinesis. Also, the company Alkali Transigen harkens back to Alkali Lake, the location of the Weapon X program. This movie also owes its inspiration to a few classics, which Hugh Jackman highlighted recently.
So I rang James Mangold, the director. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, let's do something like Unforgiven, Unchained, and Wrestler, and then he went off and wrote it.
Okay, so The Wrestler and Unforgiven, they center on these broken down former warriors giving it one last go, and Shane involves a gunslinger cleaning up a town. There's quite a few parallels to the movie Shane. For one, part of that story involves a cowboy coming up against a cattle baron attempting to run people off their land, which is kind of a subplot. Logan also tries to convey the heavy burden of killing a man and what that does to a person to Laura, like Shane does to this kid whose mum gave him his haircut, clearly. And Laura, obviously, recites Shane's speech word for word at Logan's grave. Now, before we talk timeline, first a word from our sponsor. I mean, my sponsor, and it's not really a word from them. I'm gonna be saying the words for this. Mack Weldon are a quality clothing company that have sweet looking hoodies, underwear, undershirts, t-shirts, polos, socks, sweats, which are all antimicrobial, which basically means they smell fresh all day. Wear them all day. It's fine. It's great. You better believe it. They also fit really well. I got a bunch of them. It's genuinely great quality and a little bit trendy, if you don't mind me saying so. So if you like clothing that you would like, maybe check them out by visiting mackweldon.com and use the offer code Mr. Sunday Movies for 20% off your purchase, which is that's a pretty sweet deal. All that's linked below. Right, so Timeline. So if you've seen the X-Men movies, you're probably aware that the original timeline seen in 5 of the films was erased completely by Wolverine's time-traveling shenanigans in Days of Future Past. Though regardless, everything that happened to Wolverine and the rest prior to 1973 still happened, as the timeline only branched off from then. So he still murdered his father, fought his way through multiple wars, maybe did some Team X stuff. I don't know, the timeline around then, it's a little unclear. Despite this, we know that some events took place regardless of the timeline. They're like staples. So Wolverine's traveling the country, cage fighting thing that he's all about, that happened. Weapon X, yep, that's a thing. And also the incident at the Statue of Liberty. But in the new timeline, we also know that in the year 2023, 6 years before the events of Logan, Xavier is running his school with a bunch of original X-Men. Shortly after this, he must have started experiencing seizures, resulting in the death of 7 people, presumably 7 of the X-Men. Though it could be any variation on Iceman, Rogue, Colossus, Kitty Pryde, Beast, Storm, Jean Grey, or Scott Summers. And that's 8, meaning at least one survived, or maybe they weren't present. I don't know. However, the reason that Logan exists in neither timeline, is because it's mentioned in that film that there hasn't been a mutant born in something like 25 odd years due to some kind of mutant suppressant thing that's being pumped into all the food. If that's the case, there wouldn't be any mutant students at the school in 2023. But the thing is, all the X-Men films exist in their own personalized dimension regardless. That's the only way to really explain how any of the films relate to each other. The first 3, they kind of line up, but after that it's just whatever. It's just a nightmare of recasts and the same mutant being born in different eras, people forgetting things that happened to them in prequel films, and then you got a Deadpool movie on top of that just to further complicate everything.
McAvoy or Stewart? These timelines are so confusing.
But as my podcast co-host and the internet's best mate Nick Mason says, you only really need to sort of remember the last one chronologically, because that's the way that Fox plays it. It's just fucking crazy town up there. Alright, that'll do it. Any Easter eggs though or references that I've missed, it'd be great if you could leave them below, or just any comment really, because if you leave a comment, then you might win next week's Loot Crate, like this person who won last week's Loot Crate. And if you are this person, just private message me your details and I'll sort it out. But speaking of that podcast that I mentioned, it's called The Weekly Planet. It's the only podcast that talks movies and comics and TV shows. It's not, but that's what we do. Look, it's out every Monday. It's linked below if you're keen. But regardless, thanks for watching this video. I appreciate it. Take care.